Can you see that? All good?
Yeah, all
Okay,
good.
cool.
Yep.
All right.
Fine.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time out of your day to come to this Q&A for the consultation on changes to HE-BCI. I am Talissa Plester and I am the lead policy and research analyst on HE-BCI. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We're really glad that there's interest in what we're doing. I'm Dan Cook. I'm the Director for Data Policy and Research here at JISC, the HESA bit of JISC, and I'm going to be mainly handling the Q&A today and letting my esteemed colleague Talissa lead on the presentation side of things. Yeah, both of us have been deeply involved in supporting the review of HE-BCI, and yeah, really pleased to have this consultation out in the wild. So Talissa, I'll hand back to you, and I'll turn my microphone off so that I can be in the chat and look after Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I shall move on then. So I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping just in case anyone missed this before the session. So everyone will be on mute just due to the amount of people on the call, but you will be able to ask any questions in the Q&A box. And if you have any technical issues, please let us know in the chat box or email training@hesa.ac.uk. This session is also being recorded and will be posted on the HESA website. Okay, so here is the agenda for the session. I will be doing a
Talissa, we've lost you. Kate, do you know whether Talissa's been somehow booted off the call?
No, I think she's just dropped off. I think are you okay back on there?
Yeah, so sorry. It just went off. Great timing. I'll get that back on. It just said I couldn't join the call, so that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can't see your slides anymore, Talissa. They've disappeared.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just present those again.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where I was. So here's the agenda for the session. I'll be doing kind of like a very short presentation, which will highlight the timeline of the HE-BCI review and the proposals which are currently in the consultation. I'll be giving a bit of a general overview of these for the changes to the introduction to HE-BCI, the coverage statement, and tables 1, 2, 3, and 5. And then the main focus of the session will be on table 4 and the spin-out census data collection, because this is where most of the change we are requesting is. And we are also requesting new data items in table 4. So after this, I'll be leaving around an hour for questions, so you're welcome to leave questions in the Q&A as I go along for the presentation, and we will try and get as many questions answered as possible, but if we don't have time today, we will also be publishing a full list of the questions and answers on the HESA website next week. So this slide highlights what to expect in the coming months from the HE-BCI review. We have our consultation on changes to HE-BCI out now, and this will close on the 16th of May. And then we will be publishing the notification of changes for the 2023-24 HE-BCI data collection in June. And then we will be concluding the review in July and publishing a project end report, which will detail our findings from the review. And this will include findings from our evidence gathering survey, which we had back in November 2023, which closed in January. And then we also created a logical relational data model, which we presented at workshops in December. So that will also feature in there. And then, as you can see, in July, there is a potential for a one-off data collection on spin-out companies. This is subject to consultation responses, but I'll be talking a bit more about that in a little bit. Okay, so now I'm just going to give an overview of the proposals which we have presented in the consultation. So for the introduction of the record, one of the key inclusions we are proposing is the definition of knowledge exchange. HE-BCI is a data collection which relates wholly to knowledge exchange, but this is not currently stated clearly or defined in the current documentation. So inclusion of a definition offers users a better understanding of the purpose of the survey. We've proposed a definition by the KE Concordate, as this was the definition that the majority of participants said that they use in our evidence gathering survey. We've also included more detail into the data collected section in order to specify at a high level the types of data to be found in the collection. So this will help users who are new to the data to understand the scope and purpose of the record. And moving on to the coverage statement, a couple of the definitions have been revised for clarity. So academic staff now aligns with HESA's staff definition on academic staff, and we have added links to the staff record to ensure consistency. We've also added a link to make it explicit that the definition of research is used is the HMRC definition rather than the Frascati definition. And finally, for SMEs, we are proposing to remain aligned with the EU's technical definition, as there is not a comprehensive explanation of another SME definition on gov.uk. So next, I'm going to just be sharing some of the key proposals for tables 1, 2, 3, and 5. For all of these proposals, we're asking for your thoughts on the changes, as well as your provider's burden assessment scores. So for table 1, we have previously consulted on this in our in-kind contributions consultation last year. We then released the decisions resulting from the consultation in September 2023, but we have presented the full guidance in this consultation for completeness. So for table 2, we have clarified in our proposed paragraph 6 that consultancy for other higher education providers to support their core mission of teaching and research should not be included. We've also included a new example which relates to a local football pitch, and there has also been a removal of the exclusion of master's programmes in Head 3 from post-qualification CPD activity. So this means that income can be returned from master's programmes which are only available to professionals in the industry as part of their entry requirements. We've also provided examples of courses from Swansea University in the consultation for clarity. Table 3, we have made small clarifications, such as the fact that HE-BCI counts regeneration as a proxy for local growth, and that interactions between HE providers should not be reported. And then other general updates include formatting and updating hyperlinks. So for table 5, we are proposing to pause data collection whilst we conduct further work into the area. This is due to feedback from our evidence gathering survey and our logical data modelling workshops indicating that the table is burdensome and not fit for purpose. So table 5 has also raised questions for us about the quality of data reported. So this further work would be to improve definitions and metrics in the table. So if respondents agree with this proposed change, we are asking when this would ideally come into effect. And we are also asking if and how participants use this data to get a better understanding of how widely the data is used. We have also presented an alternative option in the consultation, which has 2 key changes. So the first is that guidance on staff time has been expanded across all the subheads, so that time included to the preparation of the event should not be included, just for consistency. We have also, following the results of our evidence gathering survey, the guidance has been expanded to allow social and cultural interactions held in non-provider owned spaces to be reported in the relevant subhead. And we have also included new examples.
Melissa, sorry to interrupt. We just had a quick question in the chat. For table 2, the attendee wants to know, are we excluding overseas consultancy? And if yes, why?
Don't think we are. Can you remember, Dan? Is that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if that's come up in our discussions. I don't recall. I'll have a look through the notes and I'll see if I can produce an answer for the Q&A, and otherwise we'll have to take that one away. But off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Right, I shall move on to table 4. So table 4 has the most changes, and the changes are focused on spin-out companies, and this will basically be the focus of the rest of the presentation. So first of the key changes that we are proposing is using the term spin-out rather than spin-off. This is due to it being a more up-to-date term, and we've also had this requested by participants in our evidence gathering survey. We also have a new proposed definition of a spin-out. This definition states that spin-outs are firms that are founded based on intellectual property generated through a HE provider's research. And for HE-BCI, we interpret this as comprising all firms that exploit IP, which has both emerged from research originating within the HE provider and which can be protected using legal means. We are also seeking your views on the treatment of know-how in the context of spin-outs. So know-how can be thought of as information, skill or expertise, such as processes, methods, techniques, that is generally confidential and separate from intellectual property rights, such as patents, copyright or design rights. So know-how is not strictly a form of property in its own right, although it's often treated as a form of intellectual property. It may be more accurate to describe know-how as information, or particularly technical information, that may be protected under the law of confidence. And know-how can arise in many forms and may be held by a particular person or company. So we're therefore proposing that ventures should also be treated as spin-outs in cases where they are built primarily around commercially exploiting know-how, which has emerged from research originating within the HE provider, can legally be protected, and also where the university has the rights to exploit it. So table 4 is the only table in this consultation where we are proposing new data items, and these are on spin-outs. So we have created a new head 5 within table 4, and in the proposed data collection template, we have put this into table 4A for ease of presentation. So firstly, we are hoping for some data items to help identify the spin-out in other data sources. Examples of these identifiers include company registration numbers, country of registration, website, etc. Next, we have typology, which is a single variable to classify the spin-out as a social enterprise. And then we have creation, which involves the incorporation date and the foundation date of the spin-out. For origins, we are asking for narrative information about the description of the nature of IP, its intended application, and the department. As the slide says, this is to help make fair comparisons of spin-out performance and deal terms between sectors. Ownership during the reporting year allows us to attempt a replication of the long-standing typology of spin-outs in HE-BCI, and also to develop new typology and understand key trends. And finally, we have additional notes and major milestones. Notes help us to understand any unusual or notable features of the spin-outs, whilst major milestones help us to understand the reasons why a HE provider ceases to report a spin-out, and also to identify firms with highly accelerated trajectories. So I've just given a bit of a brief overview of Head 5 in the last slide, but here I'll be explaining our two-stage approach to data collection and spin-outs. So first, we are proposing a one-off spreadsheet-based exercise, which is based on the data items in Head 5, which I just shared. This collection would be before the usual HE-BCI 2023-24 data collection in November, and we are calling this the spin-out census, and I'll be going into detail on this collection in the next few slides. And then Head 4 in head 5 in table 4 would then gather data, which I showed in the last slide, during November, which is the usual HE-BCI collection period. So the spin-out census is a one-off data collection based on Head 5 in table 4 in order to create a comprehensive list identifying spin-out companies from higher education. We will seek data from all publicly funded HE providers in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and all providers registered in the fee cap section of the OFS's register in England. This data collection would collect all newly founded spin-outs during the reporting year, which is 2022-23, all active spin-outs during the reporting year, which is again 2022-23, as well as all additional spin-outs founded during the reference period of August 2012 to July 2023 that were not active in 2022-23. So this time period allows for reasonable estimates of survival rates to be formed and also ensures granular data precedes major events that we infer might have been disruptive to spin-out activity, such as COVID. So why are we doing the spin-out census? HE-BCI and the HE-BCI review were named in the independent review of university spin-out companies and recommended that we must present solutions to improve the reliability of data on spin-outs through the HE-BCI review. The UK government has accepted these recommendations, highlighting our consultation, which includes the new data needed for a national register of university spin-outs. The benefits of doing this data collection will be creating a valuable information source which meets user needs, and data that we collect in the spin-out census can also be amended and added to in future iterations of HE-BCI, reducing the ongoing cost and burden of management in annual collections. So the spin-out census will be collecting all of the data items in Head 5, as well as ownership at foundation, which will allow us to attempt to replicate the long-standing typology of spin-outs in HE-BCI, develop a new typology for spin-outs and understand key trends. And then the spin-out census will also collect data items on inactive spin-outs during the reporting year, which will allow us to produce a time series which incorporates spin-out survival rates over a long period of time. And we recognise that this collection may not be relevant to all HE providers, so those without spin-outs would be asked to confirm this through a brief formal nil return process. So here is a quick overview of the various options for when to collect this data. For comparison, I've put all of the 4 options on one slide with the key timings. And in the consultation, we're asking for your thoughts on these options, as well as your burden assessment scores for options 1, 2, and 3. So now I'm just going to go into a bit more detail on all of the other options. So option 1 is a full data collection in July 2024, and this would involve data capture and collation from now for the reference period of August 2012 to July 2023. The data collection system would then be open by the 25th of July and have various commit dates before final sign-off on the 26th of September. We consider option 1 as our optimal approach because there is a significant policy need for the creation of a spin-out register before the end of the year in order to ensure consideration of the topic by government funders and other stakeholders is underpinned by an improved and robust evidence base. And then option 2 involves a reduced spin-out data collection during the same timescale as option 1. So we would only be collecting data items relating to identification, typology and creation. And then we would collect all of the remaining data items from option 1 during the 2023-24 HE-BCI data collection in November 2024. We consider this as a suboptimal approach, as whilst this provides the minimum amount of information to create a rudimentary spin-out register before the end of the year, the duplication between the spin-out census and head 5/table 4A would make reporting complex in this year, as providers would need to fill out table 4A alongside the remaining data items from the spin-out census. Option 3 is also considered suboptimal from our perspective. This would involve a full data collection in August, with data collection opening at the end of that month and a sign-off at the end of October 2024. So this is a suboptimal approach for us, as whilst this gives HE providers longer to prepare, it may clash with other activity, as this is often a busy period for HE providers. The spin-out register and the useful analysis being undertaken is also then delayed into winter of 2024, kind of going into early 2025. And then finally, we have option 4, which is our discounted approach. We considered the possibility of running the full spin-out census along the 2023-24 HE-BCI data collection in November, but whilst this defers the burden of compiling the information for the spin-out census, this also introduces additional work during the normal HE-BCI collection period, and again the duplication between the spin-out census and table 4A would make reporting quite complex. So now I'm just going to move on to our proposed dissemination approach for the spin-out census. So we are proposing that incorporating most of the data in the identification, creation and typology section at an item line level alongside the UK PRN and some other provider level information in an openly available ad hoc official statistic would be of widespread value to a broad group of stakeholders. And then data drawn from other sections such as origins, ownership at foundation and reporting year and exit is of a more sensitive nature and would therefore make the data available under license for the purposes permitted in our agreements with providers. And finally, we are unsure if there is a third category of sensitive data that could be created through the data collection in the fields. However, these sensitivities will be assessed before determining the appropriate means for disseminating. And as a minimum, the entire data set would be shared under license with HESA statutory customers and to support research by the University Commercialisation and Innovation Policy Evidence Unit, as they are national advisors to Research England. Okay, so that is now the Q&A section. I will hand over to you, Dan, if that's okay.
It certainly is. So, and please do keep the questions and answers coming. So I've tried to answer some questions already, which have appeared in the chat function, and we'll try and pick those up and put those in with the rest of the Q&As. So I can see that I haven't managed to get to all of them yet, but I've answered the first tranche that's come in writing, so do review those. I'm going to swap over to the Q&A channel. So if you've raised something in chat, I'll try and come back to it. but I'm going to move over to the Q&A channel. So any new questions, please do put those in the Q&A channel. So I think that helps Kate with the administration post webinar. Okay, so I've got first question, Gabby McLaren. Hi, Gabby. Have you considered in small providers, the same person will be doing the HE-BCI and the student return? The student collection is going to have to take priority over this activity, don't have the data to hand, so it requires significant data collection activity at a time when we run on reduced academic staff. So yes, it's a really, really important question. We do understand that, Gabby. The first thing to say is that we've done some analysis of the data that we've had returned by providers in table 4 over the past I think we went back 9 years in the data, whatever's on the open data on the website. There are a couple of years that are not represented there, which is something separate we need to look into. And looking at the data for spin-offs, we managed to produce an estimate of how much data we anticipate we'd be collecting, how many lines of data we'd be collecting through the spin-out census, and it's in the ballpark of 5,000 lines of data nationally. Okay, to get it into perspective. Obviously, the definition is slightly different to things that providers have seen in the past, and so there is a question about the extent to which you can make an assessment of what you're going to get on spin-out data using old spin-off aggregate data as your guide, but we think it's a fairly good guide. So we're estimating 5,000 lines of data across the UK in total, or thereabouts. And in terms of the distribution of those lines of data, it's a very, very right skewed data set, by which I mean there are a small number of providers that account for the overwhelming majority of the data, we think. There's also a very large number of providers that are likely to have no data or very limited data, and some of the smaller providers are more likely to be in that category. We are, and also know there's a kind of middle group of 70 or so providers who maybe have up to about 25 lines of data to return. So it's a very sort of skewed data set. So those big providers who know they've got a lot of spin outs, is quite a big piece of work for them, we think. For the middle category, yeah, we think that's quite an issue as well. We're hoping for the smaller providers who've got sort of 10 or fewer lines to return, and particularly for the vast majority actually who probably don't have data, that we can help you to step through that process quite quickly. So we're going to be working on a quick start guide that helps providers, and particularly smaller providers, to identify quite quickly whether they're likely to have any of this data, and if they don't have the data, to submit a nil return to us and kind of close the process down relatively rapidly for them. And where a provider will have data to return, we're obviously asking for feedback on the different options that we're presenting that, you know, are slightly different in terms of the impact that would have on BAU, but we are talking at those providers a relatively small number of lines of data. So it's not that we don't think it's an important issue, but we have done that analysis to try and understand the sort of impact burden profile of this data, and that's one of the reasons why we're going with this timescale. The other thing to say is that you know, we've presented the rationale for the different timescales in the document. The rapid turnaround, that is our preferred option, has a number of benefits for the sector in terms of being able to tell what looks like potentially a really good story. There's a lot of potential usefulness for that data by either the current government or any incoming government. It's a sort of bipartisan issue, the importance of spin outs to the economy. So we think there are lots of potential wins for this data, and that sort of fed into our approach and our proposal as well. So do understand what you're saying, and hopefully that offers a measure of reassurance. But please feel free to fill out the burden questions in the consultation, and let us know how this will impact you. We encourage providers to give honest and detailed, where they can, feedback on all of these issues. I'll go on. Sorry, I've gone on quite a long time on that one, but I think it's a really important issue. So thanks so much, Gabby. And I can see some new ones coming in as well. So Stephen Pawsey says, can I check, please, for the new spin-out census, new table 4A, we would only be required to list organisations that fit the spin-out definition only, and not other categories reported in table 4, such as student startups. That's absolutely correct, Stephen. We are putting that new definition out there to really give a new baseline on what we think a spin-out company is. And the crucial thing here is that it's come out of research from the institution, protectable research, research where the intellectual property that's been generated can be protected. So there will be potentially some things that you've called a student startup where you might say, well, hang on a minute, that does technically meet the definition, but I think those are real edge cases. The really what we're looking for here is likely to be what you've previously referred to as spin-offs in our data. So yeah, hopefully that offers some reassurance. Okay, Lilinaz Ruhani says, hi, on removal of master's programmes, exclusion in table 2, head 3, we provide level 7 degree apprenticeships that are equivalent to master's degrees. Are these now included or still excluded, awaiting the further review later this year? Also, is the defining factor for including programmes employer sponsorship? I think I can't answer, unless you can answer any of that, Talissa. I think that's more detail than I know on this question at the moment. So we provide some degrees that are accredited and used for professional development and sometimes sponsored by employers, but this is not the only route to the programme, so entry requirements don't specify the current employment condition. Would the specific individuals be included? So I think what we're saying is that there's something that's at master's level, but it may be configured as an apprenticeship rather than an awarded qualification. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the question. If there's an awarded qualification and it fits within the definition, then I believe that's returnable. If there isn't an awarded qualification, I don't think it fits into it, but feel free to give us some extra detail or a particular case, and we're happy to look into that in a bit more detail. And we are planning some extra work on this after we've shut the review. It's an area of general interest, apprenticeships and data around those, and we're currently working on spec for a piece of work that we'll do around that is not just about knowledge exchange data, but is about looking at apprentices, who they are, who does them, and bringing some policy insights into that area. Talissa, was there anything that I missed in there?
No, I was just going to say we could always take that one back, and we're posting a document with the Q&As on, so we could probably give a better explanation then once we've had the chance to look over the guidance again. Yeah,
I feel I'm close to waffling on this. In fact, I may have gone over that line.
Sorry, Dan. There are, because I think some people might not have access to the Q&A box, so there's quite a few in the chat box as well for questions.
Okay.
If you want to take a quick look at those. But like I say, we will compile all of the questions after the event in a document. So even if those ones that are not answered, we'll put it together in the end. So
we will definitely get back to everyone on all of the questions that have been asked. So there are only a few more in the Q&A, and then I'll pop over into the chat. So Jessica Messenger says, can you clarify about table 5 proposal to pause data collection? Yeah, it's exactly that. We're just making a proposal. Would providers find it helpful to pause that? And if we pause it, which year would you want it paused for? So bearing in mind that you've already collected data potentially for the year that we're coming up to report into, you may think, actually, I prefer to return that and then pause it for the year after. So that's what's proposed. And the reason it's a pause rather than saying we're going to do away with this table is because actually social and cultural interactions are an important part of the knowledge exchange sort of body of activity, and the issue is more about the data that we're currently collecting not necessarily being seen as useful as it could be by those that we've talked to throughout the review. And so we think further work needs to be done on that topic area. I think spoiler alert, one of the big things we found in the review overall is the amount of work that we would need to do to absolutely finalize every single area of data that currently gets collected in HE-BCI to the kind of level that we've done it in the new table 4A and the commercialization piece actually would be enormous, and the review would probably go on for at least another 5 years, and that's not really the way a review is meant to work. So one of the reasons we're drawing a line under it this summer is so that we can say these are the things that we've managed to do, these are the things that we think still need to be done, and to try and set out how we think some of that work could be done in the future. So we're going to be doing a lot of planning to think around how can we improve this data on an ongoing basis, rather than as just purely through a one-off review event. So I think the message that we're getting is this is a kind of hot policy area. There's increasing demands for data. There are increasing sector interests for data across knowledge exchange, and we need to rise to that challenge rather than just have a one-off review and say that's a job done. So there's bonus content for you there, Jessica. Other data sources that will be cross-referenced with the spin-out sensor. So Rajasekar, sorry, I can't see your surname. Sorry, I've got expanding boxes all over my screen, but thanks for that question, Rajasekar. Can you provide some clarity on other data sources that will be cross-referenced with the spin-out sensors? So yes, I can. What we're hoping to do is working with Research England and the national advisors to Research England up at UCI, and the three organisations, ourselves and RE and UCI, have been working together quite closely on a whole range of activity around the commercialisation data. So we are looking at ways that we can use the data that providers return to identify those spin-outs in other third-party data sources. So a really obvious example would be Companies House data. If you give us a Companies House ID, we're hoping that we can pick up a range of useful data from the Companies House database. There are commercial databases out there which we may be able to get some information from, and there's also the possibility of using the data that's held by the ONS and using that data to provide further information around the data on employment, turnover and investment, and being able to produce independent estimates for individual spin-outs potentially from those data sources. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. And really the goal is to provide a rich data set around these companies and be able to provide higher value data products back to providers, to our statutory customers, and to sort of just generally drive up the quality of discussion and information that's available around spin-outs in this case. So hopefully that answers the question enough. But if you've got any specific questions, either put them in the chat or drop us a message, or include them in your response to the consultation. Mark Carter, does this data collection cover startups, or is there new guidance on these, or is the guidance the same? So we're not collecting individual item line data on graduate startups. By virtue of better defining what a spin-out is, there are some implications for the definition of a graduate startup. So there's, we've kind of dealt with that in the guidance to some extent, but ultimately we're not really looking to change the definition of graduate or student startup. So it's more a question of trying to draw the lines between what counts as a spin out or something else a little more clearly and brightly, and that may have some implications for the definition of a graduate startup. I think that's, again, an edge case, relatively minor. We would hope that's the case, but if you think otherwise based on what we've written, then do let us know about that. So graduate startup data will still be collected only in aggregate in the main table 4 head 4, and we have some data on from graduate outcomes survey which overlaps to some extent with this data, but it's not identical. Anna Bullen asks, will all these changes subject to consultation responses be implemented for the 23-24 return, considering we're nearly at the end of the year and may not have been capturing data throughout the year in line with changes? This could be difficult. So yes, we are intending to implement this for the 23-24 return. Mostly the things that have changed have been tightening up of guidance, where we're collecting the additional data on spin outs. We've been engaging in detail with providers that have spin out companies and trying to understand what data is already captured, including through the evidence gathering survey that we got responses to earlier this year. So we're basing our proposal on what providers have told us that they hold, and actually what common sense would tell you they kind of have to hold if they have spin out companies. There's very little there that I think would be seen as additional data. There might be one or two things, and if that's the case, then please tell us about that. But overall, we believe that most of this data is stuff that institutions will hold on spin outs and would have available in a reasonably ready format to report. Either that or the number of lines of data that they'd need to return to us would make the manual compilation of the data relatively straightforward for the knowledgeable person who's involved in spin out activity in the provider. So yes, it is the case we're looking to implement it for the 23-24 return. One other thing to say about that is the in-kind contribution changes. We've previously publicised those, and those are coming in for 23-24 as well. So if you haven't seen those were subject to a consultation previously, and we have communicated about that on a separate strand, but we're just sort of belt and braces putting that into this consultation as well to make it clear what we're doing there. Hopefully that answers that question. I think I can safely skip over to the chat function now and try and pick up additional questions that have come in there. So let me just see where we got to before. Pardon me, just navigating through. Okay, I've written some responses, so I won't go over those again unless they come up again. Actually, I will cover one, which is a question about stealth mode companies. So for those who are not familiar with this, this is the idea that a spin-out company has been founded, it exists, but it's in a state where there may be some negotiations going on around getting some venture capital funding into that company. And while that's going on, the company is operating in relative secrecy. So it may have been registered on Companies House, it may not have been, it may be kind of in a sort of in a sensitive state, shall we say. So first thing to say is we're not sure how prevalent this state is and how long it lasts for, and if this is a major concern that you would have a fair number of companies at any time that are in this state, then it would be really good to hear that in your responses. In terms of how I'd originally thought we would deal with this, it would be the case that if a provider knows that it should report a company, but it feels that it can't do for those kind of confidentiality type reasons, that you'd raise that with liaison and we'd handle that by exception. If, however, it's something that's slightly more usual and regular that would need to be handled through the collection process itself. One option could be to introduce a new column within the table 4A and the spin out census to indicate this company is operating in stealth mode, and then we'd need to be clear about what claim you were making if you were to fill out that box for a given company, and what we would do in response. And I think I can say broadly we'd be looking to keep that data confidential, other than for statutory purposes, because statutory users will still need that data in those cases. So the detail of that we would need to work out and make that part of the firmed up proposals. But it is something that we've heard sort of from the latter stages, just as we were about to go into consultation, that maybe we should have done something extra in the proposal here. So we're still open-minded about adding in a column that helps with companies in that mode and allows you to continue to communicate the information about the company, which I think is valuable for you and for statutory users, but also to keep that data protected, whether that would be for a period of time, or if we would present your last year's register back to you in the subsequent year and say, we've taken off this marker, and it will be for you to put the marker back on if the same situation persisted. And questions about what kind of quality rules will be around this. If you put more than 5% of your companies into this status, do we query that with you? Those kind of questions are not answered yet, but really helpful to have that raised as a question. Do feedback in the consultation response around that. Fiona Miller says, so we wouldn't have to include any spin-outs formed before August 2012 which are no longer university spin-outs. Correct. You wouldn't need to do that. We're looking at companies that have been founded from 1st of August 2012 onwards. It's to some extent an arbitrary time point. We need to define some sort of time point, because otherwise there's a potentially limitless burden on what we might be asking providers to return. We think that the time period that we've offered gives a good balance between having enough data to produce a time series and understand spin out development over time, covering some of the big kind of events and issues that have occurred over the last decade or so, without going too far into the past. And actually we were quite encouraged. A lot of providers have data going back an awful long time on this, so we probably could have gone back further, but this just seemed like a good balance. If there's any particular problem with that date, I don't know if August 2013 would be easier for some reason, then please let us know about that kind of thing. But yes, Fiona, you're right. You wouldn't have to include them under our proposals if they were founded before 1st of August 2012. David Coleman, is there any change to what you deem active spin out? I don't think so, no. But it may be that there's some hinterland to that question that you would want to fill us in on. I can't see anything that we've done changes what we deem as an active spin out. But I think that the proposals we've made on the definition of a spin out add clarity to what's included, and that you might think that means that other firms are now active where they weren't active before. So if you've got a particular use case, David, I'd encourage you to either pop that in the chat or include something about it in your consultation response to give us a bit more detail. But I don't think so. But yeah, I don't know what we're missing on that one. Christopher Swift, will HESA be looking to reconcile the spin out data versus past HE-BCI returns? I think reconcile, so yes, sort of, Christopher. Reconcile sounds a bit like we need to make sure that everything adds up perfectly. I think realistically, with the change of definition and the nature of the data that's been collected over the years, we're looking for alignment and to check the extent to which data we've collected in aggregate previously is a useful provides a useful comparison to the data that we're collecting in the spin-out census and onwardly in HE-BCI. So what would be nice, of course, would be able to show that the data are about roughly the same concept and they show the same kinds of trends. So yes, we are looking to look at the extent of matching between previous HE-BCI data and the new HE-BCI data, but we're not looking to do a one-to-one kind of reconciliation and say, well, you know, in 2014 you returned, you know, 5 in that box, and when we did the linking we only found 4, and you know, please explain. I don't think it's very likely that that's going to happen. We would look at it and say, okay, something in the definitions changed, and you know, we can see that there was a variance of 1 there, and that's presumably to do with changes in definitions or you know, the way that we've implemented the new collection. So yes, sort of, but not in a scary way, I hope.
Sorry, apologies.
Okay, so thanks, David. How will the data actually be collected? Do we just provide a spreadsheet? The format will influence who and how many people across the university need to be involved. So we have provided a sample spreadsheet for both the spin-out census and the revised HE-BCI collection. HE-BCI will remain a spreadsheet-based collection. The spin-out census will be an Excel spreadsheet, and you can see the draft versions of those in the consultation document. So do have a close look at those, see what you think of them. Any questions that you've got, please put those in your response to the consultation. But yeah, a draft of those is available, and we'll essentially be looking to deploy those through the HESA data collection system that you're familiar with from existing HE-BCI returns, and we'd be looking to do that for both the spin-out census and HE-BCI on an ongoing basis. So there's no proposal for a technical change to the nature of the data collection platform that we use for HE-BCI, and we're looking to replicate that approach for the spin-out census. So if you are a data submitter, if you're the record contact for HE-BCI, then the technology will look and feel familiar to you when it comes to making the upload of the data, and you will have a spreadsheet which you're able to use to collect that data and work with colleagues on compiling it. So I hope that answers that question enough. You can see little thumbs ups appearing, so I'm hoping that means that you like the answer, not just that you like the question. Fingers crossed for me anyway. Okay, back over to chat. Let's see what's in here that we haven't answered yet. Okay, lost my place a little bit. Gosh, there are an awful lot of things I haven't got to yet. Okay, apologies. This is me just trying to find my place. Active spin-out, Christopher. Only income. Okay, Deborah Willis asks, please can I check, is it only income generated from other HEs in relation to consultancy that's ineligible? For example, if a university delivered some CPD to staff at another university, would that income be eligible? I think we've only written it around consultant. I'd need to go back and check the guidance the way we've written it as well to this. So if you know the answer, please do leap in here, because I know you did more work on that table than I did.
Not off the top of my head.
I believe it's limited to, just looking down in there. think we'll have to answer that offline, Deborah. I don't want to say something that I'll then regret later on. I think one of the things that we'd spotted in the way that rules have been written into the text across the HE-BCI guidance is that there's often an exception where we say that, you know, for instance, in collaborative research, collaborations just between HE providers are not eligible. So it does seem to me that although clearly there is knowledge exchange happening between providers all of the time, that's not necessarily the primary interest for data users, because it's the sector working with itself, which is something the sector does really, really well. But the whole thing with knowledge exchange is obviously we're looking at links with business and the community, and trying to sort of draw some kind of line between links within the sector and links between the sector and outside of it is something that we've been grappling with through the review. So we'll get back to you on whether it's just CPD. It is definitely the case with consultancy, but I can't remember with CPD, and I'm not spotting it in the text I'm looking at the moment. So we'll get back to you. I don't have a perfect memory if that has not become fully apparent yet. There's a lot of detail in here, and we've been working on it over some time. So if I'm not able to answer the question right away, we'll get back to you. Mary Sarcina says, hopefully I pronounced that right, Mary. Table 4, considering the information regarding spin-out census increases HE providers' workload substantially, can the data be sourced by using the company number? So additional data might be sourced using the company number, and that is the pathway that we're following. So we're looking to use the identification data that providers return to us to help enrich the data that we're able to pull in about all of those spin-out companies. And one of the key burden reduction areas we're looking at is, can we produce estimates of turnover, employment and investment that will mean that we can provide that number back to the sector, as it were, rather than asking the sector to go look up that information for us. So that is the pathway, direction of travel that we're taking with this. That's one of the ongoing benefits of linking data. But we haven't seen the data yet. We don't know how easy it's going to be to produce those estimates from the data that providers return to us. We also know that there are some cases where the spin-out may not have a company number. So if they're registered as a mutual under the FCA's mutuals register, if they're for some reason registered as a charity, but they're not like an incorporated company on Companies House yet, so they're essentially like an unincorporated association type thing at this stage. Regardless whether that's advisable or not, it's something that's possible. If they're registered overseas, can we get hold of the data from an overseas data provider? So there are some potential limitations to the ability to link the data. So in the short term, we need to ask providers for this identification information so that we can do some of that linking work and improve what's available, what this sort of data resource that we're able to steward is, and sort of test the limits of that. The other thing to say is, obviously, HE providers are the authoritative source for what counts as a spin-out. Ultimately, we're calling this a census because the meaning of a census is you're trying to enumerate a population. You're trying to actually produce the list that says these are the companies that are spin-outs. And if HE providers don't know, then no one else really knows. Everyone else's work on this would be guesswork, but your view on whether a company that you've helped to create counts as a spin-out according to our definition is going to be authoritative. So in the first instance, we need that data from you. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, please put more in the chat. Nicola, thank you so much for answering Deborah Willis's question on the scope of the HE-BCI record. I knew that there was something like that in the record. So just for your benefit, Deborah asked about whether if a university delivers some CPD to staff at another university, would that income be eligible? And Nikki has found a bit that I thought existed in the documentation, but I couldn't quite remember. And Nikki says, no, I've lost what Nikki said. The scope of the HE-BCI record states the HE-BCI record is seeking to collect interactions between UK HE providers and businesses and the wider community. This excludes interaction between a UK HE provider and their constituent parts, colleges or corporate group, or with another HEP, regardless of whether in the UK or overseas. So yes, I think that would count as an exclusion for delivering CPD to another provider, Deborah. If that's not clear enough, then let us know. I think that that's the reason I didn't pick that up, is that it's in the coverage statement rather than in the section that I was looking at, which is the table 2 bit. So apologies for floundering around on that one. But Nikki is quite right, and I fully agree. I always agree with Nikki. Why would reporting alongside normal HE-BCI timescales be more complex? There's a really long answer to this, but it's to do with what is the population of interest, and the population of interest for the spin-out census is essentially historic data up to the end of last year. The population of interest for HE-BCI is only for the 23-24 year, and then each year subsequently. The data fields between the spin-out census and the HE-BCI collection are they are different to an extent that you would have to do quite a lot of extra work in HE-BCI, and then you'd have to undo that the following year. That would lead to burden for both yourselves and us. There are also some issues with what was the other point? It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, and there's also the question of is the timescale useful? And actually, the timescale is not that useful for policymakers. If we wait until the HE-BCI collection window, then that will be later than government really needs the data for. So we're trying to be supportive of policymakers by getting the data in a timely fashion. And unfortunately, HE-BCI is a little bit late for what needs to be done here. So that's that. That's what I've answered. Okay, Emma Dunbar says option 4 would appear optimum for our HEI. I'm really sorry about that. That's the discounted option. So we are saying that that's not one that we're intending to pursue. You are welcome to put that feedback into your consultation response, and that will form part of our analysis. But yeah, we don't think it meets the user need for data, and that's the reason why it's been discounted. Yeah, going back to the question about exclusion for knowledge exchange within the sector, as it were, that Deborah Willis raised earlier. Thanks for your further comment on that, Deborah. I think we'll take that under consideration. It looks like we might need to do a little bit more to make the guidance a bit clearer around that kind of issue. So we'll go back to that and see whether there's anything more that we could do to sort of firm that issue up. Mark Carter asks, does all of the slides around data collection on spin-outs apply to graduate startup? I think I've answered that already, haven't I? Definitely not looking to gather graduate startup data as item line data in the spin-out census, unless for some reason you think a particular graduate startup does also qualify as a spin-out. It is possible, and we put some guidance text around how that could occur, but we think it's a real edge case. It's relatively unlikely. So yeah, only return a graduate startup if you think it can be fairly classified as a spin out according to our definition, i.e. the IP that's been generated has come out of research at the university and can be protected, and the university has the right to exploit that. Yeah, have a look at the definition and ask yourself the question whether it fits. But I think the majority won't fit into the spin out definition. Is the most likely outcome. Sandra Baker, apparently Q&A not set up for this meeting. I think they are, but maybe you can't see them. I can see there's some more in the Q&A, so we'll go back to that in a moment if you've put your question in there. Okay. Yeah, Keith Miller's made a helpful clarification around the issue around intra HE sector knowledge exchange, so thanks for that. Colin Kirkpatrick, further to Mark Carter's question above, will the guidance on staff and student startups be updated? Arguably the wording around HEPs assisting the formation of staff startups or formal business enterprise support being provided to student startups is ambiguous and open to differing interpretations. Okay, I'll go back and have a look at that. I think that's a kind of go back and study the materials question. I think for the purpose of what we're doing here, we think that even if that support has been provided, it won't be a spin out unless it meets the definition for a spin out. So I think it's very unlikely that you would be in a position where there's a spin out that hasn't received that kind of support. But I hear what you're saying, and I don't think we've updated that definition substantially. What we've heard from providers is that they understand what they mean by formal business and enterprise support. It's not amenable to easy, simple sector-wide definitions because different approaches get taken in different institutions. There is a sense that the provider needs to reassure itself that when asking has it provided that support, that it has a good evidence base to say that it has. And we weren't looking to move away from that general position. But if there are any questions about that, again, raise it in the consultation or put extra questions in the chat. Okay, that's ongoing chat. I won't refer to that again. Okay, Mary Sarsina, Table 4 new patent definition has also changed. Previously, we were told to report new priorities, PCT applications. What do we need to report now? Can you clarify? So the nature of the problem that we were dealing with was that there was a lack of clarity before. Sometimes providers were returning the same patent multiple times, and really it was the same patent but returned in different jurisdictions, and in other cases they were only returning it once and treating it as a family. So we've been clearer, I hope, in the definitions that we've used here. Let me just refresh my memory and look at the actual text. Okay, so the first thing to say is we haven't really changed the definition of patents. I think we've added a couple of words in there, but we're still referring to patents as inventions, for example, machines and machine parts, materials, tools, those kind of examples. But crucially, they've got to have gone through the patent application process. And we have tried to be a bit more inclusive and specific about how we're defining all of the different areas, forms of protection for intellectual property. So we've tried to make that much clearer in general. We are clarifying that patents can only be returned prior to assignment. So you need to omit any patents from your cumulative portfolio once you've assigned them, basically, because they're sort of not yours anymore. And it says where you need to exclude those. Okay, right, where providers filed a patent family which has then been assigned, they must not return subsequent new patents from the patent applications in this family. So if you assign the whole family, then any further applications are kind of not yours, because they will have been filed by the assignee. If that's going to be a problem, let us know. If there are examples where that doesn't work, let us know, but we think that that makes sense. Okay. So what we've said specifically is we want you to file the number of new patent applications filed in the year. Should include all patent applications, including, where relevant, patent cooperation treaty applications. So where the same invention is patented in multiple jurisdictions, return only the application that has priority. Continuations or divisions of existing applications are not eligible for inclusion, and applications made under the PCT should only be counted once in this subhead. So hopefully that does away with needless duplication. If you don't agree, or there's some problem in there, let us know about it, but that's our understanding. Pardon me. Okay, Mark, is it Bob or Bobby? The spin-outs. When a spin-out ceases to be a firm, whether independent or as a subsidiary of a group, or it ceases to be active, tracking should cease. Can we still include former spin-outs that are still recognisable in a larger corporate structure? Depends on what you mean by recognisable. I think the idea is that yes, you can, if it is recognisable in the sense that it's, you know, it's got a it's still a company. It's still, you know, even if it's within a group structure, that is recognisable within that group structure. If you've got an edge case where you're saying, oh well, that company is now, like, it's just named as a department within a larger corporate organisation, but it doesn't have any separate or distinct identity, I think that would fall out of tracking. That would be my understanding of how we would intend to have that applied. So any issues with that, let us know. Hopefully it's clear anyway. Colin Kirkpatrick, could you report relevant income from other HEPs but under separate subheads so it can be distinguished from other income sources? If income is justifiably returnable under a heading, of course you can return it under that heading, but we're not really looking at knowledge exchange between higher education providers as a focus for this data set. So if you it depends what the example is. It comes down to the details, but I don't think we're particularly looking for that data. But if you can see that it fits naturally in a category and there's no reason not to return it, then of course you should return it. Mary Sarcina says, can you tell us exactly who is going to see the disseminated data with regards to spin out? So in the consultation document, we have said what the outline of what we're intending to do with the data. So we our outline proposal to you is that we operate the standard onward supply categories that we've established with your provider. So this gives you the opportunity to say, for the statutory data that we've returned, we're happy to see that used onwardly, and we give 3 options: GIST in research, in research and for kind of sector benefit type activities, and for the widest range of uses that are legitimate for that data, so commercial uses and that kind of thing. And that's your choice to say which one of those you want to sign up to, and that's something that's part of the provider agreement with us. So our proposal is that the data follows that logic and we disseminate it according to that logic. If that doesn't work for you, then you need to let us know. We're happy to have a discussion around that, but we need to start somewhere, and we have that mechanism for data governance in place already, and that's sort of agreed with you. So does this data naturally fit into that? We hope so, but if you think not, then you need to tell us. In terms of which data is treated as sensitive and which is not sensitive, with the exception of companies in stealth mode, which we've dealt with earlier in this Q&A, so I won't necessarily include that here because I think that's a special case. But what we've said is that we will produce some of the data, including the identifiers, including the company's house number and equivalent. We want to put those into a public data source so they can be used quite widely as open data. We think that's a real benefit from what we're doing. But some of the data items we suspect would be seen as not so desirable to publish at spin-out company level. So in those cases, we're looking at what we would do would be looking at the analysis that we can produce to provide useful insights from the data, but without necessarily specifying what the information is at spin-out company level. Would the more granular detailed data be made available for researchers under our normal onward use rules? If you told us that the data is usable for research, then it would be usable for research. If that's unacceptable, or you find that that's you believe this data is just a fundamentally different kind of category of data to other data that you've returned to us before, you need to tell us in the consultation response so we understand how you see the sensitivities here. We do understand that some of the data will be seen as more sensitive than others, and we specified which categories of data we see as being relatively uncontentious and which ones would need to be more protected. So questions you need to ask yourselves are, would you be happy seeing this data within a tool like the HE Plus tool? Would you want to be able to navigate that and do sector benchmarking using some of the more sensitive data, or do you regard it as even more sensitive than that? Is it something that you'd be happy for researchers to see? Is it something that you would happy to see used in a wider range of products? So we've presented a method for stewarding that data to you, which gives you the categories and how we're intending to use them. I think it's clear enough. So there's another question that gives some more detail. From I'm not sure if it's Yoen Kieran or Kieran Yoen, and whether I've pronounced that right. I hope I have. Apologies if not. Head 5 could include potentially sensitive information under the ownership section. You're also sourcing the nature of the ownership, which I would take to mean equity. Can you clarify this, please? Also, when asking for a description of the IP being commercialized under origin up to 2,000 characters, there are concerns over consistency of this information and the need to manage risk of sharing sensitive information. How will you manage this risk and ensure this information is consistent and therefore comparable or useful to end users of the information? There's a lot of detail in there, so let's pick that apart, but it gives useful additional detail from Mary's question, and I think you're basically coming from the same place here. So yes, it could include potentially sensitive information. We've recognized that. We know that the ownership section is one of those. We're not proposing that goes out as open data. We very explicitly said that wouldn't be in the open data, certainly not at spin-out company level. Would there be some usefulness in having data in the public domain that says about, general ownership trends in the sector without going down to that level? It seems to me that could be useful, whether produced by ourselves or others. So I think that is something we would anticipate. That data might be useful, but maybe not something you would want to publish at a spin-out company level. You might look at other ways of publishing that insights that are drawn from that information.
Dan, just to let you know, we've got around the correct time this time, around 9 minutes left.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Kate. So I don't think we will get them all done at the time, but we will go through them afterwards. Okay, so which I would take to mean equity. So actually, we've clarified which data fields that we would see as being included in that restriction. So just navigating to the right part of the consultation. With plans for dissemination. Okay, so if the data items fall into the identification, typology, and creation section, so broadly that's names and numbers. Typology is it a social enterprise, and creation is can't remind myself. It's the date of foundation, date of registration. Yeah, only that. We would see those as being relatively anodyne and data that could be disseminated fairly widely at spin-out company level. The other data items look like they're a little bit more sensitive, and our proposal there, so data drawn from the origins, ownership during reporting year, and exit sections from Head 5. We might have renamed exit actually. Additional notes and major milestones, sorry, rather than exit. We think those are a bit more sensitive. The question is how sensitive. So our assessment based on our understanding was that the data is not stuff that you'd want to see just printed in a big list available for all to look at on the internet, but that in terms of that data being used by statutory customers and potentially being used in line with your existing agreement with us around onward use of data that you've supplied for statutory purposes, that could fit in there. So potentially that could be supplied onwardly. You might have views on that's okay, but after a time lag, or you might say that's okay, but we're only, we would want to only make that available for research or sector benefit and not for, wider commercial uses or something like that. We don't know where people would stand on those issues. So we've just sort of presented a sort of a boilerplate version to get your feedback on it. We're happy to work with the sector to come up with something that seems most sensible. I think I've been clear enough about that. Hopefully, it's really difficult when you can't see people and you can't hear them nodding along or see them shaking their heads. You're not quite sure whether you've answered it fully or not. So I'm going to assume I've done that. Origin, the concern there is about consistency of the information. And I think the first thing to say is that we would need to do some work on the detailed origin information. It's not clear that we will get consistent information. It's also not completely clear this is the best way to collect the data. So we asked in the evidence gathering survey what kind of data providers store on the disciplinary background that the intellectual property has emerged from. We asked questions about, like staff IDs for the staff involved, cost centre, ref units of assessment, possibly subject code. There were a whole range of different examples. When we looked at that data, there was no clear emergent trend, but it did look to us like cost center might be one of the easier ones to produce, given that a number of the categories that providers said they did have information on could be mapped to cost center relatively easily. So if they're happy to munch the data, then they could return cost center. However, taking some soundings prior to getting the consultation out, we heard from a number of providers that they had some concerns about the way that we were trying to get hold of that data, concerns about producing data in the format that we'd indicated in our draft, which had cost center in it. And the upshot was that we said, well, everyone is saying that they have some data on this. There are quite a lot of differences in what they're saying that they have. Could we provide something relatively free text that then we could try and bring some order to by trying to understand what information providers are collecting here and producing some information about disciplinary background? That's one way of doing it. If you think that there's a better way, so for instance, if you were to say to us something like, I don't know, we think that broad brush disciplinary background is probably all that's wanted here. If your view is, I don't know, as long as we have, like, is it arts and humanities, social sciences, engineering disciplines, and science disciplines, or, you know, medical biotech type stuff, maybe that's enough. Like, maybe those categories or something like them would be enough. And if that was the case, then we might come back to you and say, okay, how about ref UOA categories, maybe just like main panel, as a way of allocating the spin out to some sort of sensible disciplinary background. There are still questions about how you would do something like that in my mind. So, you know, if the spin out has been part of an impact case study in the past, should your answer be aligned with what you've previously said in a previous ref? I don't know what the answer would be there. So thoughts about how useful that data is and whether you have preferences for how you would return data on origins, or whether you would advise us to make a different approach available here. That's one area where, so most of this I think is fairly well buttoned down. That's one area where I feel it's less buttoned down than it ought to be, and we're very grateful to hear your feedback on that. And in terms of how you use that data, obviously if we've given really clear guidance, you've got a unit of assessment you can map it to, then that data is going to be really consistent and comparable across the country. That reduces some of those risks that you've indicated. If on the other hand we're having to do a load of munging and trying to work out what's the emergent typology from this, that puts less control over that in your hands, and you might feel less confident about how we use that data. So really interested to hear your views on that point in particular. That's an area where I feel we didn't get it to a really satisfactory conclusion prior to consultation, whereas in other areas I think that's better. So an answer that covers both the data items themselves and also what I said previously around the data stewardship structure. If you're not really familiar with how the current provider agreement works, then whoever signs that on behalf of the institution can tell you a bit about how that works. You know, we know that not every member of staff in the provider will have insight into how that works, and we have some detail about how generally it works on our website as well. And I believe there's a link off from the consultation to that, so you can inform yourselves about how that process works. We're really quite open about our data stewardship approach, and hopefully we'll continue to be trusted, as we have been for the past 30 plus years, to do that work on the sector's behalf. I think we're really close to time. In fact, I think we've just ticked over to time. So I think that's probably the last question that we can take today. Talissa, what else do you want to say about this?
No, just thank you so much everyone for coming. We will be posting all of the question answers on the HE-BCI website, should be next week I think, and also a recording as well. Kate, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just that it will take probably a few days for that to be published, so we'll publish that alongside the Q&A document as well. So hopefully all questions will be answered, and the ones that we can't, we'll just go away and answer, find out the answer to those.
May I also just say, I've had to do a bit of an extempore hour-long speech based on your questions. I've tried as hard as I can to get everything absolutely right. If you've got any questions about anything that I've said, or queries that you think that maybe I didn't quite understand what you were asking, or if I've said something that surprised you that doesn't seem to tally with what you can read in the consultation, I'd hope that I had a really robust explanation for that, but please do let us know, and we'll try and provide any clarifications if I've caused any confusion unwittingly. I hope not, but you never know. So yeah, please let us know if there are any issues of that kind as well, and we can issue clarifications to the spoken answer where necessary.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for your interest and staying on the call. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.